So we're recording, assuming Allison confirms. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So this is the 2021 Robot Game Deep Dive, and we're going to focus on this year's rules and table and missions. And probably the best thing if you have questions is just sort of find a good break when I'm pause for a second like that and just speak up. That's the easiest thing for me. So a quick who am I? I'm the coach of the Wolfbytes. This is the 6th year I've been doing coaching. What do I do? I'm a database administrator. I knew I was an engineer at 7 when I learned what engineers were. I consider myself to be a passionate, pragmatic programmer, although these days mostly what I write is SQL code for databases. I'm fascinated by all levels of programming, everything from like what goes on in the actual hardware all the way up to what makes a good user interface design. So I got some idea who you guys are. I believe we found that Carrie is a rookie coach. And then I don't think of anyone who's only returning for their 2nd year. It sounds like I suspect Julie and Allison and I have multiple years of experience. And I'm just going to zip through this because we don't have a lot of people in the room. The big question is mission models built yet? Do you have your mission models built? Yeah, anyway, I'll just keep rolling. So I hate outlines, but we're going to go through the rules first. Then we'll go through table setup and the missions. And actually, I had some slides on here for mission selection, but I kind of pulled because I think that's better for you guys to think about that with your teams and discuss that. And we sort of did some discussion last week about things to watch out for when you're doing mission selection. So this is just a quick, my quick understanding of the game slide. The first thing is when you're designing the robot and attachments and things like that, I say you design like an engineer. And that means you identify requirements, you brainstorm solutions, you learn to think in 3D, you learn to think outside the box a little, but you're also trying to think about what's practical, what's likely to work, weighing trade-offs in designs, things like that. Then I say you code like a programmer, and good programmers are always searching for the simplest solution that works. And that sometimes means that your solution is more complicated than you want it to be, but because it works better, that's okay. But if you can think of a way to simplify it that still works, that's a good thing. But the next, and then I mentioned, I suggest that people plan like a project manager. This year's kind of weird because we don't even know when the qualifiers are going to be yet. So it's a little harder to plan this year. So maybe planning is overrated. We just have to adapt and react and keep moving forward. But the most important thing is you need to read like a lawyer. I am not a lawyer, but it's fun to read the rules sort of like you are. Rules mean exactly and only what they say. But sometimes like one rule will override another rule or a mission. The mission requirements will or supersede a given rule or an update. So you need to read all the sources and figure out which one has precedence and figure out where things are going. The other thing for returning people is keep in mind that history can mislead you. The rules change, not a lot, but some every year. Sometimes they change more than other years. And something that wasn't a rule last year might be a rule this year or vice versa. So every year, if you're a returning team, it's really important to go through all the rules and say, oh, wait, that's different than last year. We have to remember that. That could get us in trouble. 3 years ago, a Wolfbyte team member discovered with less than a month before the qualifiers that we hadn't noticed that they had made a big change and they were assuming that the previous year's rules still apply, that their attachment wouldn't work, and they had to figure out how to salve that. Important thing, so you're going to refer to the rules and the updates, and remember that for the last 2 years, first shipped mails, like 6 of these booklets, 2 of them are robot game rule books. Those are the ones to really, that's the one to really pay attention to for robot game. But the other thing is updates. The updates come out, they can come out every week, they can go months without it. You go to the FLL website, there's a place where they have the downloads, and you check to see if the updates have if they've updated the update since the last time you downloaded it. And I recommend download that and print it out and maybe stick it in the back of the book or stick it in the front of the book, but make sure that you have current updates with the book, so that the kids can refer to that and don't get messed up by not knowing about an update. You can also print additional copies of the Robot Game Rule Book. That file is available as a PDF up on the website. So let's get into rules. The first, and every time you see one of these white screens like this with like this red equipment, that is a screen capture I took from the Robot Game Rule Book. So this is what's in the rule book. This is what we all refer to. If a competition, and there is some confusion or there's discussions going on between the kids and the referees about whether something is allowed or not, they should be coming back to the Robot Game Rule Book and the updates and pointing at things and saying, well, this is X, and discussing. So equipment. So equipment is anything you bring to the match for mission-related activity. So that includes a robot, attachments, strategic accessories, the innovation project, which is for one of the missions, you build an innovation project out of Legos that were provided with the mission or with the table set, but that is not considered a mission model because it's part of your equipment. You bring it to the table. Equipment does not include the mission models. Those are part of the table. They're, if you were doing an in-person match, when you show up, those are all there, set up on the table or sitting in home or whatever. So all equipment needs to be Lego made in original factory condition. That means you cannot cut an axle. You can't break something off of a Lego piece to change its shape. You are allowed exception to cut Lego string and tubing, and you are allowed to put identification marks in hidden areas. And that can be useful if you need to label the brick as to who owns the brick. Just make sure it's in an area that's not easily seen, and you're okay. Things to be aware of here. Lego string is a specific thing. If you need string in your model, or I mean, not in your model, in your robot or attachments, you need to go probably look on eBay or some other site and purchase Lego string. Lego tubing, Lego rubber bands are a specific thing. So if you're designing a attachment or part of your robot that needs something like a rubber band, go on eBay or go on, you might find stuff on Amazon and purchase official Lego rubber bands. Yes, they're expensive, but otherwise it's not legal in the robot and the attachment. Couple things, you are not allowed to use official Lego made wind up pullback motors, like the kind that as you, like you have wheels on them and you pull them back and they it's up a spring or something like that inside, and then they zoom when you let go of them. Those are not allowed. You are not allowed to create copies of mission models. That's not allowed, at least not to bring with you to the competition. You could make copies of the mission models for practice or for development work or whatever, but you're not allowed to bring them with you to the competition. Non-electric Lego pieces are allowed from any set. And that includes like, there are those caster wheel pieces that came back in the day with like a big heavy ball bearing in them. Those are legal. Uh, one year, the Wolfbytes used some of the Star Wars things, had something where you turned a crank and it fired little pieces off of it, like it was supposed to be sort of like a Gatling gun type thing for a Star Wars model. And they discovered it on one of their siblings, and they were like, "Ooh, let's use that." And they used that was legal because they're true Lego pieces. You're allowed to use. You're not allowed to use the packaging of the clothing, just the building pieces. And if stickers are still on the piece the same way they were supposed to be in the Lego building instructions for that kit, you don't have to peel the sticker off. That's legal. And finally, you're allowed to bring a sheet of notebook paper that you could print out, program notes. I assume the notebook there is defining the size, not what's how the writing got on it. But that can be very useful for a checklist. But only allowed one piece of paper for the checklist. And you're allowed to use Spike Prime, Mindstorms EV3, and NXT and RCX for the electric stuff. Let me think if there's anything else. So equipment includes jigs. That's the strategic accessories. So a jig is, when you're launching, it can be really important that you have the robot aligned in a specific way. And a jig is something that you maybe push up against the walls and then the robot slides into, that allows you to align the robot in a specific position and a specific orientation on the table to speed up launching. Thing to be aware of is that table sizes can vary. So you may need to design your jig so that you can adjust it a little bit depending upon the width of the table and where the mat is on the table. It's just something to think about. I think that's pretty much it for this slide. Any questions? I'll figure you'll unmute and speak if you've got a question. So continuing on with equipment, you're allowed one controller at a match. You can bring a spare controller with you to the competition, but it's not allowed to show up at the match. You could swap them out. So if you had problems with controller A and you need to swap in controller B back in the pits, although this year pits, I don't know if that's going to be a thing. But at the match, one controller, you're allowed to have 4 motors. So that means that if your motors are in your attachments, you can't have like 5 attachments that each have a motor. That would end up, you'd probably have 2 for the wheels plus those, that would be 7. That's not allowed, only 4 motors. You're allowed as many sensors as you want. You can only plug in so many to the controller. So that means that you might want to, and plugging and unplugging stuff during a match kind of gets tricky. So just something to think about. Usually most teams end up with a max of 4 sensors and 4 motors, because that way they can keep everything plugged into the controller. So, and specific sensors, you're not allowed to use the infrared sensor that comes with EV3, because that can be used to send commands to the brick. And you're not allowed to have anything that's effectively remote controlled. It's not allowed. So 4 sensors are legal: color, distance/ultrasonic, and gyro sensors are allowed in any mix and number. Continuing on, so software and control. You can use any software that allows the robot to move autonomously on its own, run only by programs that are loaded onto the controller. So no communication with the robot. You turn Bluetooth off. And my recommendation is that you turn Bluetooth off, do some practice runs, because turning Bluetooth off can have a subtle impact on the controller. Controller can execute programs. It can loop through stuff faster when Bluetooth isn't running because it's not using a certain amount of its CPU to think about Bluetooth. It's always valuable to verify that your programs execute the way you intend them to when Bluetooth is off. And I recommend if you were in-person competition that you turn it off before you get to the competition. And if you're going to need to reprogram, my recommendation is consider using USB so that you aren't having to turn Bluetooth off on. But anyway, okay, so no remote control in the competition area. Definitions, robot. So the robot is your is the controller and any equipment that is currently combined with the controller by hand and intended not to separate from it unless by hand. And what that means is that if I, let's say I have my robot and I put an attachment onto the robot, and my intent is that the robot's going to drive out with that attachment on and come back with that attachment still on it, then that attachment is part of the robot at that time. On the other hand, if I have an attachment, my robot kind of, like I put the attachment down on the mat and it slides onto the front of the robot, and the robot's to drive out with that attachment and then back out of it, leaving it behind, then that attachment isn't part of the robot, because the intent is that that attachment will be left out on the field. So that then would count, and we'll get to this in a little while, as cargo. So the basic point here is if something snaps off of the robot and that wasn't your intent, that's still part of the robot because you didn't intend for it to separate from it. So there's some sort of subtle things here. And the other point here that's critical is that during a 2.5-minute match, the robot, it changes. It doesn't change when it's out on the field, because, well, unless it's an accident. But while it's in home, you can put an attachment on, and now your robot is bigger. You can remove an attachment from it. Now your robot is smaller. Any questions on this one? Because this is important. And the examples there at the bottom are good ones. A removable forklift attachment counts as part of the robot, but only while it's attached. A weight the robot is carrying that's going to drop on something is not part of the robot. That's cargo. Okay. On to the next one, mission models. So these are the Lego objects that are on the field when you get there. So everything from this is a mission model, and it would be snapped down on the field. If you guys have built them, you've noticed these things are mission models, and they may be out on the field in their starting locations, or some of them could be in home, but they're still mission models because those are intended to be there when you arrive for the match. Obviously, with virtual, you're going to have to be more disciplined internally about keeping a mental model of what's mission model and what's part of your equipment. You cannot take mission models apart, even temporarily. So I can't get to the match, and on this model, I can't do this. That's taking it apart. And even if I put it back together, that's a violation. Obviously, if it happens accidentally, that's one thing. But if I'm doing it because I want to loop that thing around something, that's not permitted. If you combine a model with anything, including the robot, the combination needs to be loose or simple enough that if asked to, you could free the model in perfect original condition immediately. Now, they may issue some clarifications in the updates on immediately, because as a geek, I look at immediately and say, is that a nanosecond? Is that a microsecond? Is that a millisecond? Is that a second? Like I want a definition for immediate. But I'll look at intent here. So if I were to take this and I had something like this, I just took it over like that, then I could obviously just grab it, remove it. That would be easy. If I had something where it snapped together like this, if it was a thing that the robot could pop open and I could take it off, that would probably count as being okay, I guess. I don't know. This one is one where I want to see more clarification. I would probably say if they snap, if it's really easy to get open and pull it off quickly, almost immediately, that's probably okay. But I wouldn't say put it inside a box where there's a lid that closes down on it. That's probably not okay. So think about it. I would probably draw that line at if I have to run a motor to get the thing back out, then it's not okay. I need to be able to get it out without running the motor or really manipulating the robot that much. All parts of a model count as the model. So frames, bases, as I just pointed out, the loops on the thing, those are all part of the model. So continuing on. Oh, remember that your innovation project is not a mission model. Okay, precision tokens. These are the 6 red precision tokens. They will be separated. I just have them snapped together so that they, there you can see them there, all 6 of them. And they are worth points when the match starts. You can get a max of, I think, 60 points. But if you have to interrupt your robot while it's out on the field, when it's not in home, then the referee takes them away one by one. And when they're gone, they can't take any more, so there's no negatives, but you've lost those 60 points by the time they're all gone. And there are more rules than that. We'll get into those.
Toby?
Mission, what? Yeah.
Can you go back to the statement you made about the innovation model?
The innovation project is what they're calling it this
Innovation
year.
project, right.
Right.
Can you just clarify that one a little bit for them?
Okay, so the innovation project, and we'll get to that, that's min 1, is the one that you get the 2 bags 8 that came with your set, and you build something with them that's supposed to represent your innovation project. That is not considered a mission model. It's considered part of your equipment because it's something you bring to the table. Does that make sense?
Okay, it does.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that a little bit because it was without the context of that. So it's a sort of an odd statement. And
yeah, and we'll get into when we to mission 1, the innovation project itself. We'll hit on that a little bit more at that time, just to make sure it's clear. So definitions: mission, 1 more tasks the robot can complete for points. You try them in any order you like. You don't have to complete all the missions. Most teams don't even attempt to complete all the missions. And a given mission can have multiple objectives, and there are different points for each objective. And we'll get into those in detail later. Definitions match. So 2 teams opposite each other on 2 fields joined north to north. For 2.5 minutes, the robot launches, returns, and repeats, trying as many missions as possible. So a couple points here. First of all, virtual has an impact on this because for virtual matches, there isn't really a team on the other side. They can't send stuff over that wall to you and versa. And the other point is that you aren't competing against the other team, except possibly for the sort of playoff things that are just for fun, but aren't part of the official robot game. So your best, you 3 matches, and your best score from those 3 matches is what counts for your ranking in the robot game for that tournament. Unless there's a tie, at which point it goes to the second highest score. one thing is that it's possible, and I don't know because I haven't done robot design judging or judging, but I were a robot design judge, I would be looking for some degree of consistency on the table. Two teams that had equal high scores and had pretty good designs, but one of them worked really consistently, and the other didn't. I'd be like, consistency is a good, but I don't know I can't say for certain. And I have mentioned here the competition scoring rubrics. The person to talk on that is Elaine, and they still haven't issued the final guidance for how they're going to do that this year. But basically for the match, 2.5 minutes, and we'll get into launching and returning to home and all those rules as we move forward. So technicians, you are allowed 2 technicians at the table at a given time at the field at once. So you can switch out technicians by sending a technician back and having another technician come forward. But otherwise, everyone else on the team has to stand back. Usually we have line on the floor to say, yeah, the rest of the team needs to be inside this box so that they're not interfering with the referees or in the way. So you get 2 technicians at the field at once. You don't have to use, not only can you switch within a match if you want, you don't have to use the same technicians for the 3 matches. So one of the things that we as Wolfbytes have recommended is that we found that swapping within a match can get tricky from a timing perspective and losing focus, etc. But at the same time, if you only train 2 technicians, then you're vulnerable if you issue like a technician gets sick. So we've tried to ensure there's at least 3 people who are trained as technicians. We all sort of have this idea of a primary and an assistant, but again, you don't have to do this. This is just what the Wolfbytes have found has worked well. The primary is the one who's responsible for hitting the buttons on the robot and getting everything aligned and ready for launch. The assistant is helping move attachments or do stuff, and they practice being both primaries and assistants. Frequently we'll find that like this person's a primary with this assistant, and then maybe the assistant for that will be the primary with somebody else as an assistant, so that we have redundancy. And in competition, they'll decide, okay, which pair is going to run any given match. And we also recommend practicing launching and practicing. It's kind of like being a pit crew. The more you practice it, the smoother you are at it, and the better you react when things go wrong. And the other thing is, I have the kids practice as they get closer to a qualifier or a tournament. I have them practice not, oh, that went wrong 1 minute and let's start from the beginning again. I'm like, no, run the whole 2.5 minute thing. Practice what would you do if the robot does that in competition? Making those decisions about, do we try and relaunch that mission? Do we take the loss of a precision token by touching the robot? Do we say, no, that's not going to rerun, jump to the next sortie? Looks like Allison's trying to talk. So we say, as you get closer, practice letting things go and figuring out what would you do next? And then if something goes wrong, we'll have them do a quick post-mortem, like, did we react the way we would want to react if that went wrong in competition, or what should we have done differently, and gaming that out.
So Toby, can I toss?
Yeah.
I'm going to interject this real fast. The 2 technicians at the field, you can definitely swap them out. So this is a thing that different teams handle differently. So I'm throwing this out for the new coaches. Some teams have 2 kids at the table and they run all the programs. Please excuse the black lab groan behind me. Some teams have pairs, and these pairs will run this match, and then the next pair runs the next match, and so they do it that way. Some teams will have kids changing out throughout the match. Maybe these are the kids that programmed that one. et cetera. So you just have to decide what works really well for your team. And sometimes that's one that the kids make that decision. Um, anyway, so that's
Yeah,
just another factor that you want to throw in there.
yeah, yeah. And practicing that ahead of time. If whatever you decide, you're going to practice it over and over and over again. The other thing that I recommend that if the rest of the team isn't at the robot, or the team that isn't at the robot, and again, this is less of an issue for virtual matches, but what we'll do is have them practice observing, watching, because they might notice something the technicians don't notice. So then mentioning something that may have been missed, but doing it in a supportive manner, but also understanding that the technicians are the ones at the table that have to make the decision at that moment. So don't second guess them. Sometimes they will make mistakes. That's okay. Everyone does. So, having the team practice, not blaming them and not making it personal, but just, oh man, that's life, um, and understanding also that lots of things go wrong on the table that technicians had nothing to do with. The table is different in competition than the one you practiced on in your home over and over again. And it maybe there's a bump floor that it's getting offset, or the lighting is different, or the walls are not exactly as smooth, or whatever. And then the other thing we have them practice is cheering, and cheering for the other team. So okay, equipment inspection. So before the match starts, you come with your equipment, and all of your equipment, you remove it from any containers that you brought it in, and the containers get handed back to your team away from the table, away from the field, and you have to demonstrate to the referee that all of your equipment will fit completely into one of two inspection spaces. They're imaginary. They're not hard boxes. So the spaces each have a ceiling that is 12 inches high, so you can't stack up as high as you want. There's a limit. The small space is, as you can see on the diagram, it's the space that's off the mat on the table, although I believe it includes the black line of the border of the mat, because lines are considered to be part of space that they surround. And you can see the arc, the launch area arc, and then extend that all the way perpendicularly to the west edge of the table. And if you fit entirely within a small area, you're going to get some bonus points. That's mission 00. If you don't fit entirely in the small area, your equipment, robot, attachments, everything you brought with you must fit in the large space, including being below the 12-inch ceiling. If it doesn't fit in the large space, you have to break the excess down, or send it to the pit area. So you could take an attachment apart. I don't see anything in here that says that you can take an attachment apart, fit it into the large area, and move stuff around. And I don't know. That's an interesting question. It just occurred to me. Like, can you reassemble a piece of equipment as you spread things out into home? I'm going to go send that off to the robot game people, to say, what's the ruling on that? So note that if your equipment wants to sort of topple over or something, you can use your hands to hold it into the inspection space. So that's legal. Okay. One note I have here is keeping my table variation, that the width of the table, there's a certain amount of variation that's legal there. Like, I think maybe a 1/4 inch. We can later, there's a screen side where it shows what the variation is like to be. So if your table is slightly larger than the competition table, the mat could end up, because the mat slides all the way to the east wall, that means the inspection area could be slightly smaller. So do keep that in mind. It's not going to be, you know, a huge amount, but if you're right up against the limit, it could be an issue. The 12-inch height limit applies only to the equipment inspection this year. It doesn't apply during launch as it has in previous years. And the small area advantage is 25 points this year. And the other important thing is you must keep everything except when you launch your robot and it goes out in home during the entire match. So you're not allowed to have a cart and set stuff on it or set stuff on the floor. You need to be keeping it in home. And you shouldn't have stuff sticking to the edge of the walls. So, okay, any questions? Completely in. So the definition of completely in is 100% contained in the airspace above an area and under the ceiling height if one is given. The only ceiling height that's given is for the inspection, and completely in 100% includes every bit of something, not just the parts that touch the mat. So if you've got an attachment with an arm and it sticks out over the borderline, then it's not completely in. Drawn lines that form an area are part of that area. So this is showing the launch area, and as you can see, the completely in on the left, it's allowed to overlap the borderline, but not go past the outer edge of it. Any questions? Moving forward.
Yep, we're good. No questions in the chat log. You're doing great, Toby.
So field checks. At the beginning, before the match starts, and after you arrive at the table and you've done your inspection, you can do field checks. In in-person competition, the general rule has been that you don't get to touch any of the mission models. Your team doesn't get to touch the mission models that are out on the field. They can touch the ones that are sitting in home, obviously. And by the way, the mission models that are sitting in home, like some of these that start in home, those do not have to fit in the inspection area because they're not part of your equipment. Those are mission models. Therefore, they're not your equipment. But during the field check, you can put your robot out on the field mat and calibrate sensors, color sensors. You can ask the referee to check field setup, so to check the models. You can point out like, oh, that thing isn't in the right place, or that is oriented correctly. I recommend having, if you're doing 5 missions and you know which mission models you're interacting with, it's really important for your team to make sure that those mission models are functioning properly out on the field and that they're oriented where you want them. And I recommend having a checklist for that. That 1-page piece of paper, it's not a bad idea for that thing to have. Check this, you know, these are the things to check for on this mission model. I've seen the Wolfbytes have been affected by mission models that were sticky, they didn't slide smoothly, that were incorrectly aligned, that were missing critical pieces that were hidden from view. There was one year where you had to, there was like a food dispenser thing. You had to slide stuff out the bottom of it. And those pieces had been put in, instead of being flat like this so that they could slide out one at a time, they've been put in vertically so you couldn't slide them at all. And you couldn't see it. And that caused a lot of problems. So one of the things I do is I play malicious ref. I'll have the team leave the room. I'll go and mess with the mission models, undo a little bit of dual lock here, adjust something over slightly, unsnap something. I mess with all the models, and then I have the team come back in, and they're not allowed to touch them. They're only allowed to look and ask me to check stuff, and I'll try to see if they can find all of the things that I messed up. Like that for some reason, and I enjoy it. So field checks are really important. And in previous years, the definition was you had a minute, although nobody ever stuck to that. This says, yeah, you've got So that's good. Home. So home is the space where the robot goes between missions. And the important thing about home is if the robot makes it all the way into home, you're allowed to touch it without any loss of precision tokens. And when it's bringing stuff back to home, this is the space it's bringing it back to. And as you'll see, this year it includes the area off the mat, the black bar at the edge of the mat that is next to the area that's off the mat, and the area that is also launch. So the launch area is the launch area, and it is part of home. So if you can get back into the launch area, that's considered being in home or off the mat or some combination thereof. Note that home doesn't have a ceiling. So once you're done with inspection, home goes as tall as you can reach. And I do recommend that you stick down that west edge of the mat, the edge that's next to home. I use black electrical tape and I cut it into sections about maybe 1.5 inches long. And I typically put down, I think 7 pieces. So I'll put one in the middle, one at each end, and then 2 pieces in those gaps. And the reason to use multiple small pieces instead of one long piece is that way you can still see the width of the black line, because that can matter for launching. But if you don't stick it down, pieces can get under there and it tends to curl, and that becomes a problem. You're also allowed to stick down the east edge of the mat, but I tend not to do that because it's hard to get that really stick properly over to that wall, because it's supposed to butt up against the wall. So more on home. So it's your space for handling and storing allowable things whenever you like. It's also the place for handling and preparing the robot before and between launches. After any launch, the robot needs to return completely into home if you want to handle it without losing a precision token. So your team will be hovering as the robot comes in, and every last bit of the robot and whatever its cargo it's bringing and whatnot has to come completely over or past that black line before you touch it. Otherwise, you're going to lose a precision token and possibly cargo. The robot can leave home only from the launch area, so you can't. It can return home anywhere. This is an interesting rule that I hadn't noticed. It can leave home only from the launch area. But the question is, can the robot overlap into home slightly while it's out on the field? That's one I'm going to actually write to them on. I would say in previous years, it was to go into home, interact with stuff, and leave as long as you didn't touch it. I'm suddenly, as I'm seeing this for the first time, going, does that mean if the robot comes completely back into home, you have to relaunch formally, or it has to drive to the launch area and go out? I'll get a ruling on that. Do not interact with things outside home except by rules R15 and R19. That would be once it's launched. Anything the robot affects or moves completely outside home stays as is unless the robot changes it. So you touch stuff outside of home and the robot goes and does stuff outside of home, stuff stays as the robot did it. Exception 1, if something comes out of home by accident, like you bump something and it slides out of home, grab it quickly so it doesn't affect things on the field and bring it back. If equipment breaks off the robot unintentionally, you can pick it up as needed. So you can make a choice on that. If something snapped off of an attachment out on the field and the robot makes it, whether the robot makes it back or not, you can go grab that piece without losing a precision token. But if it's the robot itself, if you grab it, you'll lose a precision token unless it makes it back to home. And you cannot strategically send or extend anything partly out of home except by launching the robot. So you can't hold on to something in home and use it to manipulate a model that's outside of home. The robot needs to do that. But launching, and we'll get into this, doesn't mean the robot has to leave home or leave the launch area. So you could have the robot be in the launch area, you press a button, and the robot flings something out onto the table. But it has to do that as part of a program. So here's another diagram showing home, and home is that yellow area. And you see that it includes the line on the edge of the mat. It includes what will be the launch area and everything off the mat. Okay, launch area. So this defines what area of home the robot launches from and gives limits for that area during launches. So the imaginary space labeled launch area below has no ceiling. The launch area is a part of home with a special purpose, but only when launching. So for every launch, the robot and anything it is about to move needs to fit completely in the launch area. So the robot can't extend back off the mat, and if anything it's taking with it can't. But you can have a jig that is going all the way to the west wall being used to align the robot, because the robot isn't going to move that as it leaves. And right after and between the launches, the launch area is a regular part of home. So you can do stuff once the robot launched. You can start grabbing that jig and setting up for whatever's going to happen next. One point that my my team members suggested I put in here is, if you're using jigs that extend into home, consider some sort of modular jig. So you might have something that goes all the way up against the west wall, and then you might have different things that slide into it somehow, so that you don't have to have a bunch of huge jigs. And there's no ceiling, no 12-inch limit in launch this year, but I do recommend that we don't abuse that, or it may return in future years. And this shows the graphic of where the launch area is. So launch. So when you're going to launch, the referee, you're going to show the referees check 1 and 2. I feel that if it's a subsequent launch, like once the match has started and you're doing additional launches, that's the referee's responsibility to observing for checks 1 and 2. And then you press a button or signal a sensor or allow a timer to get the motor spinning. Check 1 is that the robot and everything it is about to move fits completely in the launch area. And check 2, you are not holding anything from moving, including motor, torque, or stored energy. So you're not like holding something back that's on a rubber band. It could be held back by a catch that the robot has, so you're not the one holding it back. And then when you press the button and the robot starts its program, maybe it has a motor that undoes that catch and the stored energy can go. That's okay, but you as a human aren't restraining that stored energy. And then for the match start, the earliest time for the first launch is precisely at the beginning of the last word or sound in the countdown. Just 3, 2, 1, Lego. So it's the beginning of the last word, the L in Lego. And all other launches can happen as soon as you show the referees checks 1 and 2. But I think your team should be clear about showing the refs checks 1 and 2. But I don't think it's your responsibility to. They should be watching you closely, so that you've got it, you got it. You show your hands are off it, everything's in launch area, and you click. Okay. Any questions? Keep moving.
Nothing in the log. Nothing in the log.
Yeah. Okay. Interruption. So when you interact with a launch robot or anything touching it, you are interrupting. And interrupting isn't necessarily bad. So if the robot is all the way back in home when you interrupt it, that's normal. However, if it's not completely in home when you interrupt it, you'll see what happens in Rule 16 R19. You're going to lose a precision token and possibly cargo if it's not completely in home. So the best time and place is when it's completely in home, and you are not allowed to use what they call exact perfect timing of an interruption. your eyes doing the work of a timer or sensor as a strategy to produce a new scoring result or advantage. What this means is if your robot is driving forward, pushing something out, say, and you are watching it like a hawk, and as soon as that thing is in a specific space, you're stopping the robot, that doesn't count. The robot has to have come to a stop, and then you could grab it. You're not allowed to use when you interrupt the robot to get it to do something a specific way. Does that make sense? And you're not allowed to send or drop things that hit or land on the robot. That's considered, that's not legal. If the robot returns home and you do not interrupt it, it is free to interact with things you might have placed there for it, and it is free to leave from anywhere in home without a launch. So this answers my question from earlier. So this is why it's really important to read all the rules. So earlier I'm just going to jump back quickly, we noticed in this ruling about home that it can leave home only from the launch area. Well, that's true when you're launching it. But if you have launched it, then in R15, it says that if the robot comes back into home and don't interrupt it, it can pick up things from home and drive back out, and that's perfectly legal. So R15 is modifying our whatever that was. Any questions? Carrying forward. Interruption procedure. So if you interrupt the robot, you stop it, or it stops on its own and you start touching it, and you carry it home if it is not already in home. If it's completely in home, you interrupt it, all good. If it was not completely home, you lose a precision token. The referee will take one of those 6 red discs. So there's a couple minor points here. Mislaunch exception. If you interrupt the robot so soon after launch, it has just barely reached the launch area arc line, and you need to relaunch it, but you don't lose a precision token. So if you're like, oh, we forgot to put this thing onto the robot before we hit the launch button, and it just barely got out there, you can grab it and halt it and relaunch, and you don't lose a precision token. On the other hand, if it gets pretty far out onto the field, you're going to lose a precision token. Motor saving exception. If the robot is stuck outside home straining its motors and you do not intend to launch again, you can stop it, shut it down, and leave it in place without losing a precision token. So if it's driving around the field causing all sorts of mayhem, if you stop it, you lose a precision token. But if it's bumped up against a wall and spinning the wheels and straining and it's not going anywhere, and you want to just put it out of its misery, you can stop it and leave it there, stand back, and you don't lose a precision token for that. And then there's an end of match exception. When you get to the 2.5 minutes, the buzzer goes off that you have hit your 2.5 minutes, you need to stop it as fast as possible if it's still driving, and that doesn't count as an interruption because it's the end of the match. Okay, I'm going to keep rolling. Cargo. So when something, and this could be a mission model, it could be your innovation project, it could be an attachment you're going to leave out on the field that you intend to leave on the field. So while something is purposefully or strategically being captured, kept, moved, or released, it counts as cargo. When the robot is clearly no longer touching whatever thing it was controlling, that thing is no longer considered cargo. So that's the definition for cargo. So it's something that the robot is carrying or moving or pushing or capturing or whatever. If you interrupt the robot and the robot has cargo, if the cargo is completely or partly outside home during the interruption, there's a consequence. If the robot had it when it launched, you get to keep it. So if the robot launched with that piece of cargo and you interrupt the robot out on the field, then you keep that piece of cargo. You can bring it back to the robot to home. If it was something that the robot picked up when it was out on the field, then the referee takes it. And it's the most recent launch that matters. It's not if it launched with it 3 launches ago. If the current launch for this sortie. So that's the ruling there. And then, oh, and one other quick note on this one. My reading of this rule is that if the robot, if it was cargo with the robot when it launched, and then it became not cargo, but the robot maybe came back and started moving it again, it's still cargo that it had when it launched. It doesn't say it has to be continuously cargo from the time of launch. So then you would be able to still keep it, but not lost control of it and wasn't touching it at the time you interrupted. And what also matters here is, did the cargo itself make it into home? So if my robot is pushing something back to home and that thing makes it all the way to home, but the robot doesn't make it all the way into home, that thing is safe when I interrupt the robot. If I then interrupt the robot, I lose a precision token, but I don't lose the cargo because the cargo itself was completely inside home at the time of the interruption. So that's a critical, like, fine point, but it matters. Stranded cargo. So stranded cargo is when the robot abandons the cargo. It leaves it out on the field or home or wherever, but the robot is no longer touching the cargo. If the former cargo is stranded outside home, it stays as is. So if I push my innovation project's cargo, and it's completely outside home, wherever it ends up, that's where that's where that innovation project stays. If it's partly outside home, you must take it into home and lose a precision token. So if it abandons the cargo partly on the line, then you lose a precision token as you take that cargo into home. And if the cargo needs to come to rest before this can be decided. So if the robot loses control of something and that thing's rolling around on the table, you got to wait for it to be still before it can be decided. And if the equipment being taken into home by hand has a mission model, then the referee takes the mission model. Unless, I believe, that's a question on. I still think the cargo is completely inside home at the time of the interruption. And I think that still counts as interruption by cargo. This will only be if the cargo that's being taken into home has or is a mission model, then the referee takes the mission model. Okay. Interference. Robot cannot interfere with the opposing field or robot unless there is a mission exception. So you're not allowed to try to keep the other team from doing something by putting stuff on the other field or whatever. Gracious professionalism. Collaboration is okay. Field damage, if the robot separates the dual lock, so unsnaps a mission model from the table, or even just pops one of the pieces off, or it breaks a mission model, the field stays as it is. You're not allowed to go repair the field. But any missions clearly made possible or easier score 0. So if your robot drives through a mission model and knocks it off and keeps going, I think that made your mission possible or easier. So I try to assume that any damage on the field is going to zero out stuff happens after that point in that sortie. the recommendations, dual lock doesn't always stick super well. It usually sticks pretty well, but the less you rely on it, the better. So just something to be aware. And note that, again, during a match, you are not allowed to reattach a mission model. So that's something to train the kids on. Okay, carrying forward, end of match. So this rule cautions that if the robot's accomplishments are wrecked before the match ends, they do not score. So there are few, I think there's maybe one mission this year where there's a thing you do during the match that isn't visible at the end. That's where you drive underneath the pull-up bar. But apart from that, if you push something into the RePlay logo, and then later your robot pushes it out of it, it no longer scores. What matters is at the end of the match. So it's precisely as the match ends, you freeze everything as it is, stop the robot, leave it as it is, keep hands off everything, and let the referee score the field with you. So mission requirements must be visible at the end of the match unless a method is required. So methods have returned from the previous year, and practice halting the robot quickly. So practice having somebody counting down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and your technicians are there ready to hit the stop button on the robot and stop it and freeze it right as they hit. Okay. Direct warning. Robot game text means exactly and only what it says. If it's not defined, use its common conversational meaning. If a detail is not mentioned, it does not matter. So that's an important thing. There will be plenty of times you're like, well, that isn't discussed at all. And that means it's probably okay. Or it is okay. Information ranking. What if two game facts disagree? So among all the robot game information sources, recent robot game updates have the highest authority, followed by the mission, then the competition rules, and then the field setup. And it gives you the link for where you go to find robot game updates. Within any one information source, text has authority over pictures. And then videos, emails, and forum posts have no authority. Always check updates. Regularly check updates. And then the other thing is, if you think there's going to be some discussion between the ref and the team over a point, you need to prepare your team to advocate, because you as a coach don't get to go talk to the refs and say, well, what about this? And the team does that. So you can practice being a ref and say, I don't think this is the way it is. And the team can get the rule book out and say, well, come look at this rule. What about this? Benefit of the doubt. If the referee's decision could go either way, or if the referee's preparation, attention, vision, or memory causes an issue, you get the benefit of the doubt. You're not supposed to abuse this rule, so you shouldn't plan on needing it, but you should be aware that it's there. And just remember, coaches don't get to advocate for their team during competition. So you expect that there will be discussion with the judges, with the refs, prepare the team for that discussion. Role play that. Final results. Once you agree with the score, it becomes official. So once your technicians and the refs have agreed on the scoring sheet, it's official. If your team and the ref haven't, if your technicians and the ref haven't come to a final decision yet, or having difficulty agreeing on something, there's a head ref for every competition, and the head ref will make the final decisions. A score from ranked matches counts towards advancement. Ties are broken using the second best scores as needed. If it's still not settled, competition officials will see what to do if we get all the way to a third place tie. And playoffs, if held, are just for fun. Have the team practice being assertive without being confrontational is in my notes. And attention to detail is really critical there. So the changes for 2020, 2021, I forgot to make this slide show stuff one at a time. Home now is the launch area. Launch jigs can extend into home. The launch height limit is gone, but don't abuse. The inspection height limit, 12-inch limit during inspection, is still there. There's no competitive mission this year. If you remember from last year, there was a thing where the robots could drive up a bridge and battle each other to try and lower flags. They didn't do one of those this year. That was the first time I'd seen a competitive mission in FLL, and I'm happy to see no competitive mission this year. You can use Spike Prime this year. Some minor rule changes in wording. Those are the big changes. We're going to get into missions in just a minute, but some general advice. Coaches and teams model the values during competition, those core values. And during the whole day. There's no secret sauce in FLL. Share. If you've got a good idea, you should be telling other teams about it. Set goals that are problem driven, not opponent driven. You're not trying to beat the opponent. You're trying to beat the table. The kids do the work. They touch the robot. They talk to the referees. As they get older and more experienced, I don't even say like, hey, do you guys want to power up your robot? It's like, is there something you should be thinking about right now? And my favorite times as a coach, and it's been watching them grow, I've been doing this now for a number of years, is when I'm worrying about making sure the tables out on the competition area are right, or panicking about scoring software or something like that. And I discover that they've gotten themselves all ready for their next match. They know what time it is. They've gotten everything. Somebody's off in the corner booting the robot and making sure the gyro sensor doesn't go haywire. And I can basically ignore them. And that actually makes me proudest as a coach. And yes, if you've got a new team, it takes a while to get there, but it's really cool to see it when it happens. Okay, so the table setup, here's the variation. I was wrong on the 1/4 inch. It's 1/8 of an inch is the allowable variation in the wall-to-wall dimensions. And for both the width and, that's hilarious. This diagram, I just noticed, got L and W swapped. They've got width and length running the wrong way up above or on the bottom. That's pretty funny. I should point that out to them. But the big note here, and again, if we're not doing a lot of in-person competitions, it's not as big of a deal, but the height of the border walls is allowed to vary from 2.5 inches high to 4 inches high, which is a pretty big variation. The official competition tables are supposed to be 2.5 inches high, but I know that at state meets, etc., all of those tables and the Anchorage meets are still 3.5 inches high because they were built with 2x4. So your robot needs to be ready for that. All the border walls on a given table all have to be the same height. And 2 adjoining tables, they have to match, but just be aware of that. Also, the walls aren't always perfectly straight. They can bow a little, or they can have splinters missing, or they, that's life. So you have to design your robot to accommodate the real world. We do our best, but those tables are pretty old. I do recommend labeling the walls on your table with tape. I like to put west, east, north, and south on them because it makes it easier for people to glance at the table and talk about it. And okay, variability, we do our best. The tables won't be perfect. Practice and test with this in mind. Mess with your table, try other tables, adjusting the mat a little, do things like that to try and see how does your robot handle. Border wall splinters can trip you up, and the table wall variation. Building the models need to be built. This is again from the Robot Game Rulebook. Need built perfectly. Almost perfect is not good enough. If you practice incorrect models, the robot will have problems at competitions. And there is no need to build bag 9. Am I pulling this correctly? There we go. Now you can read the 9. This is the one with the different colored doohies and the little squares and all that. Those are giveaways. They don't actually get used during the competition anywhere. And there's some tips and tricks for building your replay mission models at that website. So mat placement, when you put the mat down on the table, first you're supposed to check that there are no bumps and vacuum the mat well. Then you unroll the mat and it gets placed to the south and east sides. So it snugs up against the close wall and the what would be the right wall if you're standing on the south wall. And you can use thin strips of black tape. I like black electrical in small sections, and I tend to just put them on that west border. Okay. Dual lock. One quick note, if you haven't built your tables yet, a number of the original shipments of the kits shipped with dual lock that did not work. It wouldn't stick to itself. I stuck down dual lock all over a table and then started trying to get the mission models to stick, and nothing would stick, and I was going crazy. And then I realized I'd missed an email in my mailbox saying there are some problems. They shipped out new shipments of dual lock that do work. You could take the old dual lock and do test to peel off some squares and check to see if they stick really well to each other with the little plastic room things. And if they do and it's good dual lock, use it. But if not, throw that thing away because it's going to get you into trouble. And in general, the process is you stick one piece sticky side down in the square on the table, and then you take another square and push it part way down upside. You don't want to push it all the way down because you'll get too much finger grease on it, but like on the corners to get it sort of tacked down so that the sticky side is up. And then you align the model really carefully. And I recommend doing this. Can help to have an adult doing this because you need to get far out on the table sometimes to accommodate for parallax. You want to make sure that you're looking straight down and move your head around, get it perfectly aligned as you carefully lower it down, and then press the whole thing down firmly, but try to use the thing closest to that dual lock. So each square, you're pressing down right there and sort of jiggling it just a little to try and get the glue to stick really well to the mission model, and then you peel it up carefully, making sure that the dual lock stays stuck to the mat and stuck to the mission model. And then I go back to and I press down on the mat again on the dual lock that remains on the mat, and I press really well on the dual lock that's to the mission model because I'm trying to get those things to stick as well as possible. And then when you're putting stuff out on the table, be really careful about making sure it's not so much the dual lock to dual alignment that matters, it's the border of the mission model black lines and making sure that that space is all perfectly even. It's exactly where you want it. So here's a quick table overview. Note that the printout in the rule and this copies it has a mistake. If you look in the upper left where it says M04, that's supposed to say M05. And shows you basically home is that yellow boundary, including the launch area, and the launch area is the small quarter circle. And we'll just keep moving. So mission 00 is the equipment inspection bonus, and you get 25 points if everything fits in the small inspection area. If it doesn't fit in the small inspection area, remember you need to be able to fit in the large inspection area, because if you don't fit in the large inspection area, then you can't do anything on the table until you do. And this is all of your equipment, but doesn't include mission models, but does include your innovation project, because your innovation project is not a mission model. Onto the innovation project. So you're going to build that from bags 8, and you don't have to use all of these pieces. You can use only the pieces in these bags that you want. It needs to have at least 2 white Lego pieces. It needs to measure at least as long as 4 Lego studs in at least one direction, and they show that there. And when you put it out onto the field, it needs to either be partly or completely in the RePlay logo or the gray area around the bench, as shown at the bottom. And you only bring, it calls it a model here, but it is not a mission model. It's just a model that represents, supposed to present your solution to the innovation project, but you don't have to prove that it does. And it counts as equipment because it's not a mission model. One quick note here. Last year it had to be completely in, which meant there was an advantage to making it small. This year it only has to be touching the RePlay, has any part of it touching either the RePlay logo or the gray area around the bench. So a somewhat larger innovation project might be easier because as long as any one part of it is touching, that counts. But also note that it's touching, not in. So that means that if it has a bunch of stuff that sticks off it that's not on the bottom, that's just up in the air sticking out, then that doesn't count as touching. So that's something to think about. You want the area that touches the mat to be large enough to make sure that it's touching the RePlay logo or the gray area around the bench. Note that the gray area around the bench is not necessarily that little thing. It's the whole area that's gray around the bench. And you're only allowed one innovation project that you're putting out, and that's why they say 20 max, because if there's only, other point. If you had a super humongous innovation project that was like this big, so you could push it out there and it could touch both the RePlay logo and the gray area, you wouldn't get 40 points for that. Does that make sense? You still only get 20 points. And this shows, this is where the gray area is out on the mat, and this is where that RePlay logo is. A step counter. And I'll hold this up in front of the video as well. So this thing goes out on the field, and I'll orient it like you would see it, and it starts in, as you can see, this thing is kind of hard to move because it has this escapement mechanism. It starts like this out on the mat, and then your robot's going to come along and push this, and notice that it likes to catch, and that makes it hard to move. So it kind of, and the farther they get it pushed, the more points they get. If it's in the magenta area, they get 10 points. In the yellow area, you get 15, and in the blue area, you get 20. And if it's right on the border, then it's benefit of the doubt. It counts for the point count. If you've ever seen Dave Patterson do a presentation, he says stop, stop, stop thing. When I stomp 3 times, that's a hint. I will just say this. I don't see anything in these rules that say that your robot is only allowed to interact with this thing. I don't see anything that says your robot can't touch the rest of this, as long as it doesn't break this mission model or damage or undo the dual lock. It's allowed to interact with the rest of this thing. So that's just something to think about. That might make it easier. This escapement mechanism is kind of a pain. Okay. And this is where it's located on the field. One thing, whenever I show you these things located on the field, you should be thinking, or your team will be thinking, how far away is it? How hard is it to get there? Stuff that's closer to the launch area, it's faster to get there, and it's frequently easier to get there and more reliable to get there. So that's something to be thinking about. So the slide. So the slide starts with these slide figures exactly as shown. So as you can see from the diagram, This one down here, there's one that's up on top, and it should basically have that sort of black ring aligned with the white stuff there. And then there's one that starts on the bottom. And the one that starts on the bottom, it sort of loosely goes over those brown pins or axles. And then you get points. You get 5 points if you slide one of the slide figures off. This guy's going to go for a ride. If you manage to get both of them off, you get 20 points. You don't get 25. You get 20. But to get the second one off, your robot's going to have to come and somehow push this one up the slide and then over the top and then down. Then, if your robot manages to get one of the slide figures completely into home, you get another 10 points, and you can only get points for one of them going into home. And then if you get a slide figure completely off the mat, by the heavy tire and is touching nothing else, then that's 20 points max. And I just noticed something. It just says, if a slide figure is held completely off the mat by the heavy tire and is touching nothing else, you get 20 points max. And when you look at the picture, it implies that the heavy tire is there on the field. But if you weren't trying to get all the other heavy tire points, I don't see anything stomp that says that heavy tire couldn't be in home at the time that the slide figure was on it. Just a thought. So max points for this would be 20 for slide figures off the slide, 10 points for being for one of them being completely in home, and 20 points for one of them being held completely off the map, heavy tire, touching nothing else. So here's where the slide is out on the field. Here's where home is for getting one of those slide figures back at home. There's where the heavy tire is, but note that the heavy tire can move around during the match if the robot does the moving. So mission 4 is the bench. So the bench starts like this, and there's this backrest on it that's removable. It just sort of drops down in there. If the robot manages to, my hand be this, get the bench down flat, then you get 10 points. If the bench is down flat and you have those little cubes that came either from home or there are a couple of them that are out on the field, but generally you use the ones from home. If those are inside these 4 or any one of these 4 areas and they're touching the mat, you get 10 points for each space. So you can have, if you got 2 of them in one space, you don't get 20 points. You only get points for that space, but there are 4 spaces. So you could get 40 points from that. And you also get 15 points if the backrest is completely out both of its holes. So this does not count as completely out because it's still in this hole. But if it gets completely out of this hole and it's like that, that would count, or that, or wherever. So you can get 65 points there. And the bench is located here. It's pretty close to the launch area. Oh, Allison is asking if we should take a quick break. Sorry, I didn't see that. Sure. Do you guys need a quick break?
We interested in that, or would you guys just like to keep rolling? Thoughts?
I may have put them all to sleep by now.
Is that a thumbs up? Is that a, oh, I want to keep going, says Cynthia.
I'm okay. I'm going to keep going because also from the recording perspective, that could be an advantage. So right. I'll try and keep things moving. So, There's where the bit.
We will have the recording, and I'm gonna figure out a way to get your slides up. I may have
Yeah.
to pull the fancy graphics flashing things out of them in order to do it, but we'll figure it out. So if you
Okay.
do have to make a run off to do something and come back and you miss something, you'll be able to pick it up with the video or the slides. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
So there's the bench. The cubes, there are that like 13, if I can still math, 13 cubes that start in home that you can use for various missions. And moving on. Oh, other note, update 5 in the updates. This is our first update that I've put in here. Points out that it's the spaces that you put the cubes in that count, not the total number of cubes. So 10 points per space. Basketball. So here's the basketball mission model. Make sure that these things are built correctly, these little catches. And you can get points for putting a cube into the crate. So here's a cube, that would be 15 points. You can get points for raising the crate. If it raises up and it catches on that middle height white stopper, that's 15. If it's resting on the top one, you get 25. So the maximum points here would be 40, 15 for the cube, and 25 for being on the top height white stopper. Be aware that as you're lifting this up, obviously you want to make sure your robot doesn't lift this off the top and have it fall down, or have it somehow get caught. It has to be resting on that white stopper to count. Okay, and as I move forward, we should be able to see this is located over here. It's past the bench, so it's a little bit farther, still close to home. It'd be, I guess, pretty easy. You could get home between the two. And there are the cubes. Pull-up bar. So that's this big thing. And if the robot passes completely under the bar through the pull-up bar's upright frame at any time, so that means all the robot starts on one side and drives through to the other side, or vice versa, you get 15 points, and you only get points for doing that once. If you do 2 or more times, you still just get the 15 points. And then the other way you can get points is if at the end of the match, the pull-up bar is holding 100% of the robot up and off the mat. No part of the robot is touching the mat. And the typical test for that has been if you can slide a piece of paper under the robot without it catching, then it's not touching the mat. Then you get 30 points for that. And that's an end of the match thing. And they point out here that the next mission, you can't score both that next mission and the held up score because they're both end of the match scenarios. And a pass-through can score northward or southward, but only one way and only one time. And a pass-through scores at the time it happens. So nothing can take it away from you once you've driven through there. That's an exception to Rule 22 because this is one where it's only a method. Okay, and then here's the location of the pull-up bar, kind of centrally located. The next one is robot dance. If the robot is dancing on the dance floor at the end of the match, you get 20 points. So, and any silly or skilled repetitive action counts as dancing. So it's not just enough to drive there and stop. It wouldn't qualify for robot dance. Your robot has to be doing something repetitive out there. And the critical point is that the controller for the robot has to be at least partly over the dance floor. So that blue box at the end of the match to qualify for those 20 points. So something to think about here is you get 30 points for hanging for the pull-up bar, you get 20 points for doing this. That means if you do the pull-up bar, this is probably not as difficult as the pull-up bar. So the question is, do you want to try and get those 10 extra points because you give this up to do that? Here's the location of that out on the field. And there's been an update on this one. It shows a non-scoring condition along with 3 scoring conditions, but it also points out that because it's really hard for the ref to tell whether it was whether the controller was directly over the dance floor at the end of the match, the benefit of the doubt ruling is that the referee has to say, I am convinced for sure that the robot's controller was not overlapping any bit of blue chalk line as the match ended. And otherwise it count. So this is the one with probably the most complicated scoring rules. So there's the share model, which is this thing, and it starts with a red cube and a blue cube in these little liftable doohickeys. And this would point over to the other side of the field. So if you're looking at from your perspective, from the south side, it would look like this, with this coming toward me over the north dual wall. Then there's a frame you can see in the picture, and the frame is where stuff can land. And then there's a bocce aim model that looks like this. You can also see the picture, and this rotates on its base, and also has a little thing you can lift up to push cubes off. And then you also start with 13 cubes in base. So it's an interactive mission, although if there's no opposing team, there's some qualifiers for that. And only one part of it is interactive. But if both share models, this is the share model, remember, have sent only one cube anywhere onto the opposing field, and those cubes color match each other. If both teams, if the two teams both send the red over to the other side, or both send the blue over to the other side, and there's only one cube that went to the other side, so they can't do both of them, then each team gets 25 points. And there's a qualifier for that for matches where there is no opposing team, and we'll get to that in a minute. In addition, if there are cubes completely in your frame or target area, remember this is the frame, you get 5 points for each cube, so you can go deliver a bunch of cubes from your home area to the frame and get points for those. If there is at least one yellow cube that's completely in your target, which is a small thing inside the frame, you get 10 points for that, in addition to the 5 points for it being inside the frame. A couple blue notes that are critical. If there's equipment even partly in your frame, M08 scores 0 you. The opposing team is not affected. So that means touching the mat inside the frame, over the frame. If there's any equipment that you brought to the field that is anywhere in the vertical space above the frame or the space inside, you don't get any points. If, like most teams, you have only your one practice table, your sent cube will simply go over your north wall during practice. And so let's go. So here we have some scoring examples. So these showing there's a left scoring example and a right scoring example. So in the left one, you sent over blue, the opposing team sent over red, and that means you don't get the 25 points, but you have 1, 2, 3 green, a red, and a yellow, so you have 5 inside the frame, so you get 25 points for that, 5 times 5. And then you have a yellow inside the target, completely inside the target, get 10 points for that. In the right example, the opposing team sent a blue to you. You sent a blue to them, so you get 25 points for that. The other blue that's in your frame must have come from your home area. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inside your frame, so that's 35 points, but you don't have a yellow cube that's completely in the target. It's only partly in the target, so you get 0 points for that. Then some update. Oh, here's where it is on the field. There's your mission share, the thing that sends a red or blue. This is showing what the other team's table will look like. This is your, I forget what they call that model, the target thing, the target aim model. And here are the cubes that start in your home. And there's your frame, and there's your target inside the frame. And must have something else flashing. Okay, so a couple updates. The mission 8 sharing adjustment. If exactly one cube is sent north over the wall from your bocce share model, but you are the only team in the match, which I think will be the case for pretty much all virtual competitions, you automatically get the 25 share related points. In this case, it is treated this way. You did the cube away and you do get the share credit, but you do not get an imaginary cube that can be used or counted anywhere. So you don't get a cube that lands into your frame, but you still get the 25 share related points. And then for the one where you're trying to put cubes into the frame or target area, you are required to load one yellow cube on the bocce aim model at the start of the match, and the solutions must be autonomous, but it doesn't have to be that yellow cube ends up in the target. And there's no reason that you couldn't have an attachment that grabbed that cube and brought it back to base and then delivered it out there. I don't know why you do that, but that's legal. But the cube that you send north over the wall does have to come from the bocce share model. That's the one that has 2 on it. Okay. And one note I'll make on this, that sharing adjustment makes this a lot easier for virtual tournaments because you don't have to coordinate with the other team and you don't have to rely on the other team doing the bocce share to get those 25 points. Mission 9 tire flip.
Toby?
Yeah.
You do have a question.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
It says, can you address how to you see it in the chat log, or you want me to read it?
Yeah, I can see it. So your model is frozen. Do you mean that these things don't lift up? You can go to voice.
Yeah, I guess we must have built that part of the model wrong because they're just stuck there. So we'll just have to look at how we built our model. We must have done something wrong there.
Yeah. It's very important to check. These things on this one, as you can see, they're on pretty loose pins in there. I forget I think they're, you know what it may be? If you didn't use tan pins for that, if you used like the black pins or kind of stiff, then yeah, these would be really stiff. There should be, I think it's a tan pin that's connecting this, or no, it's probably an axle through there. I can't remember because it's been a while since I built it.
Well, great.
Yeah.
We'll look at that and fix that. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and this one should also be very free. And critical for building on coming back sort of to this one, this needs to be really free. It shouldn't be stiff. If you press these together to this piece here, let's see, if you press this piece and this piece together too hard and this gets stiff, you need to separate them just a hair so that this is really loose as it hangs and can flop back and forth easily. There are some other models where that's really important. So always things that should move easily, make sure they do move easily. Tire flip, there's 2 tires out on the field. One is the light tire that has the blue tread. One is the heavy black tread. And when you start, you can see in that green box in the upper right, when you start, the green centers are supposed to be facing up. And then your robot goes out and flips them. And then the white thing is, if the white center is up, you get points. So for the light one, you get 10 points if the white center is up at the end of the match. And for the heavy one, you get 15 if the white center is up. However, if the heavy tire crosses the red flip line, or that in just a second, at any time, even partly during the match, it scores 0. So this one, your robot could go and grab and bring back to base, to home, and you could flip it in home and have the robot push it back out there, or or in fact, wouldn't even have to be back out there. It could just bring it to home, and you could flip it in home and have it sitting white side up in home, and that would get you 10 points. But this one, it's not allowed to ever come past that red line during the match. And then for each one that is completely in the large target circle, you get 5 additional points. So you can get 10 points there. So you could get a total of 35 points for this. Oh, nope, wait, I'm wrong. It says for all scores, the tire needs to be resting on only the mat. So that means that if you brought back to home, oh wait, and flipped it, if it was off the mat and home, that wouldn't count. But if you put it in the launch area and left it white up in the launch area at the end of the match, I think that would still count because it would be only touching the mat. This is what I mean by talking to the lawyer. Yeah, okay. Okay, so, and this is where the tires start. There's the light tire and there's the V tire, and then there's the red line that thou shalt not cross. And then there's the target circle. Okay, cell phone, just a second, let me. So the cell phone looks like this, and it starts there on the mat in its little circle oriented like that in the green box. And if the cell phone ends the match white side up, so these little white things resting only on the mat, then you get 15 points. And it doesn't say where it has to be on the mat. It says that it has to be white side up somewhere on the mat. Hint, hint. And it starts way back there. So it's a little bit of a drive to get it. And then you either got to flip there or bring it home, flip it. And make sure it's on the mat at the end. Treadmill. So this is the treadmill model. The goal here is that the robot is going to, the pointer starts in this position. Wow, that's really loose. Okay, starts in that position. And there are these little things that can turn here. I don't know if you can see those. And as you turn it, the pointer moves. And it moves very slowly because it's got a big reduction gearing system with a worm gear and all. Note, it makes it very clear that if a robot takes and just moves this pointer, that does not count. It would score 0 if the robot moves the pointer by touching the pointer. Yeah, and I don't think you're going to be able to move that gear without running these because of the worm gear assembly. So, and you get points depending upon how far you move it. If it gets it past gray or to gray or past gray, you get 5 points. 2 or past red is 10, etc. So you get a maximum of 30 points from that thing. And that one is located out here in the southeast corner of the mat. So it's a little bit of a drive, but it's a pretty straight line. The row machine.
Hey, Toby,
yeah.
Toby, we got a question on the tire flip.
Hey.
Let's see. Does it matter? Let's see.
I don't think it matters whether the tire is flipped or not for the heavy tire for the slide mission.
For the slide.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm not going to go back through the slides. I don't remember whether they showed green or white up on that one. I think it actually showed green up, but yes, it doesn't matter whether they're. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you put the slide figure on the tire and then flip it and that knocks the slide figure off, then you've lost the slide figure thing. So if you're going to flip it, you want to do the flipping before you put the slide figure on it, because what matters is what's at the end of the match. Okay, so are there any other questions out there? Nope. Okay. So the rowing machine. here's the rowing machine. So the goal is, this is the free wheel, this one that I'm moving. And if it, at the end of the match, if it's completely outside the large circle that it starts in, and you can see that in that sort of green box in the upper right. If it's completely outside of that, as shown below, then you get 15 points. In addition, if you manage to put it completely in the small circle, you get 15 additional points. So you can get a total of 30 points for that mission. And it says completely outside the large circle and completely in the small circle, but it doesn't say that it has to be touching the mat, and it doesn't say that equipment could not, you couldn't leave equipment behind or the robot touching it. It just says where the free wheel is at the end. That's what matters. And here's where it's located. It's along the middle of the east wall, and there is the small circle there, if you want to put it in the small circle. Weight machine. So this thing is going to start like this, and you can adjust it into different positions. So what makes this one weird is that before you start the match, you select where you want the machine lever. So do you want it like this? Do you want it like this? Do you want it in between? And then during the match, the robot is going to come out and move the lever, either press down like this, or it could do it by lifting on the other side if it wanted to. Either is fine. It just has to move that lever somehow, so that, as you can see on the back side, there's a little stopper, right here, this yellow stopper, and it has to, let's see if I put this a little, if you can see, it has to move it until that yellow stopper falls. Oh, it doesn't do so well if it's tilted, and then it's resting on that little yellow stopper. So if the stopper is actually, it doesn't have to be resting on it. Just says if the stopper is under the lever and the lever setting is blah, blah, blah. So you could still be pressing this down, and that's legal because the stopper is now under the lever. It doesn't have to be touching the stopper. And you get, then it says you measure the lever setting, and if it's blue, you get 10 points. So this would count as blue. That's magenta, you get 15. That would count as yellow, and it shows on the diagram how you measure the lever setting. So before the match starts, you slide it where you want with the stopper on top, resting on top like this. This is an exception to Rule 12. And the lever setting is the color under the east face of the east green bar, and it's lever setting at the end of the match that matters, in addition to being the stopper under it, that how many points you get. So I don't see anything in this that says that you couldn't start with it like this under blue and have a robot that came over and did something like this. On the other hand, it's all about how far you got to move that thing versus how much force it takes to move it. That's the way levers are. Carrying forward, so you get 10 or 15 or 20 points, and that weight machine is up here in the northeast corner. It's the farthest away mission model. Health units. So you will start with 3 of these health units in home and 5 out on the field in these 5 locations. And then your goal is to collect them from around the field or take the ones from home and move them to target areas. So if they're touching either the RePlay logo or the gray area around the bench, you get 5 points for each health unit that is touching RePlay logo or the gray area. And if they are looped over a pull-up bar post as shown, you can get 10 points for them with a maximum of 4. And the ones looped up over the pull-up bar post as shown cannot be touching equipment at the end of the match. I mean, obviously they can touch equipment while you're doing it. At the end of the match, they should not be touching any equipment. And there are 2 pull-up bar posts opposite ends of that pull-up bar. So they start, you have 3 in home. Then there are 4 that are pretty, well, variously easy to get to that are out on the field where there's 4 flashing rectangles are. And then there's a 5th one that's kind of hidden back at one end of the pull-up model inside the frame. That one's going to be fun. And then here are the gray area and the RePlay logo. And then there are where those posts are. Precision tokens, you start with 6. And if you don't do any interrupting outside home, and you add 6, you get 60 points for that. If you have 5 left, you get 45 points. 4 is 30, 3 is 20, 2 is 10, and 1 is 5. They did issue an update saying that if you are competing in a match with no referee present, you should set up your precision tokens in the white triangle at the beginning of the match. This way, the teams start with identical setups, and your robot doesn't get to use. That's interesting. And your robot doesn't get to use open space there. And I think the appropriate one is sort of a 3, 2, 1, 90, 45, 45 triangle. It's hard for me to show that here, but it's sort of hinted at in that diagram showing 30.1 in the lower corner and then 1 in the upper corner. Just a couple points on strategy. Think about mission selection. Nobody's complete all the missions. So as your team is thinking about which missions it wants to attempt and which parts of those missions, you want to think about efficiency. So points versus difficulty versus time, because you've only got 2.5 minutes. And you want to start by going after the low-hanging fruit, the easier stuff to complete, especially if it's you a decent number of points. And think about reliability. So consistency versus luck, although I like to say that luck favors the prepared. So I've got some bad news here. If you've got 4 sorties, and we use this term sortie to refer to a launch that goes out and does stuff, comes back, because it might be doing multiple missions on that sortie. So if you have 4 sorties that you're planning, 4 times you're planning to launch the robot and have it come back to home, and if each sortie has an 80% success rate, which means that 4 out of 5 times that sortie is successful, that means you only have a 4% chance of all 4 of them going successful in a given match. So reliability is a critical issue. The good news is that if you do 3 matches with that 40% overall success rate, and you have an 80% chance that at least one of your matches will be successful. This can be fun if your kids have studied a little probability to have them start figuring out how reliable this stuff need to be. And then sort of sortie design. If you're doing multiple missions in a single sortie, that's more time efficient, which is good because you only have 2.5 minutes. But the fewer things you try and do in a sortie, typically the more reliable that sortie is, because if the thing goes haywire, everything after that's likely to go haywire too, if the robot gets bumped off course or something like that. And then the other thing I mentioned is, and you can't avoid this all the time, but intra-sortie dependencies. So anytime you're going to do something in sortie 2 that only works if you did something successfully in sortie 1, then you're affecting sortie 2 when something goes wrong in sortie 1. Whereas if they're independent of each other, if sortie 2 doesn't depend on sortie 1, then at least if sortie 1 goes haywire, you can still try sortie 2. So those are just things to think about. Okay, questions?
Hey, Toby, can you talk briefly about navigation?
Yes, that's probably that's a good thing to talk about. So this is something I covered in the presentation last week. But one thing that beginning teams and even somewhat experienced teams sometimes fail to realize is that there are 2 parts to completing almost any mission, or maybe 3 parts. The first one is you've got to get to the mission model. You've got to navigate your robot around the field, and that's being done by your program. You're not remote controlling the robot. And once you're out there, you need something to interact with the mission model and maybe some programming for that. But navigation is something that humans take for granted. Most people don't remember learning how to walk, learning how to move around a room, learn how to adjust when they walk in the wrong direction. It's something we learn before we start forming memories. And so we forget how difficult that is. And what I find is that navigation is one of the hardest parts of FLL. Wheels slip on the mat. The motors don't always rotate perfectly. When you're launching, if you're off by half a degree in the alignment, I think it is, by the time you get to the other end of the mat, you'll be off by like half an inch or an inch. Well, that could be enough for your attachment to miss the mission model or to not interact with it properly. So navigation is tricky. Most teams use a lot of head reckoning, meaning I drive in this direction for a given amount of time, then turn, drive in that direction, then I turn. And each of those turns can introduce error, and the error build up. And so things to think about are, how does your robot align itself while it's out there on the field? You can use color sensors to look for lines. The gyro sensor can both help and be a nightmare. I pretty much every team I know that's used gyro sensors has struggled with gyro sensor reliability. Maybe the Spike Prime ones are better. I don't know. I haven't tried those. But they can still be helpful if you can figure out those reliability issues. And other ways of aligning robot out on the field is a simple one. I mean, it'll only get you a line in one X or Y direction, but if you've got the square back on the robot, you bump up against the wall and drive for just a second, the odds are you're square against the wall and you know exactly where you are. You don't know where you are left, right, but you know where you are up, forward, backward relative to the wall. And so that kind of simple, like, just a second here to bump up against the wall and get oriented. And then you've eliminated 2 of the 3 degrees. Remember, the 3 degrees of freedom for your robot out on the table. There's an X, there's a Y, and there's a rotation. One other thing, wheel slip can be an issue. So thinking about how the weight balance on your robot is relative to the wheel, thinking about which wheels have better or worse traction. If you're using tracks, that frequently adds a lot of variation. Maybe not going speed all the time, but then your robot's slower and you only have a certain amount of time. Now I'll let Allison throw some more questions my way.
I will add that you can also align on mission models sometimes. We've been known to build a little device that will just slide onto a mission model, lock on, and it'll just place you right there.
One good trick for that is, or one good thing to think about for that is, there are the pieces that have like a 45 or an angle on them. Unfortunately, I guess there aren't a lot of those on. Well, here's an example of one right here on this piece here, this thing here with the angle. Unfortunately, none of my Legos are here. They're all someplace else. But those, if you had 2 of them, Allison's grabbing something. I hope, is she gonna show? It's flickering in and out of your background. But yeah, having something with 2 little arms sticking out allows you to sort of capture onto the mission model and then slot on it. You're muted, Allison. But yeah, there's a good example. So, one other thing when designing attachments or parts of the robot that are going to interact with mission models, there are two strategies there, two main fields of strategies. One are passive, or I don't know if you call it passive or semi-active or something like that, attachments, which would be ones that don't have a motor that's controlling them, but that use the movement of the robot and interacting with the mission model to do something. So gates that can, pop past and latch on, or things where it pushes against the model, it pushes a lever and that lever causes something else to happen in your attachment that interacts with the model. And then the other strategy is you've got an attachment that uses a medium motor to turn something or do something, and that medium motor is being controlled by the controller. It's good to always be thinking, would using a motor here simplify this attachment, or can we just do this without the motor and that's actually simpler? And I've seen a lot of successful, clever strategies where I think one year Fuzzy Logic Squirrels didn't use a single medium motor in any of their attachments, and they were really successful. It was sort of the challenge for that year for them.
Julie has pointed out that she wet wiped the mat and tires to clean dust off of it. That helped with the traction. I know one
Yeah.
team, I think it may have been EOS, the Girl Scout team that did so really, really well for years. They used to hand out one of those anti-static kind of wipe, just cloths to wipe down, and they used to wipe their wheels and I think it was that team and just the area all the time, and that was a big key to their success.
Especially practice tables, because they begin to develop a little bits of rubber dust from the tires over all the practice sessions. Something else to keep in mind, though, is that, and I think we saw this last year with one team at one of the qualifiers, is that the mat that you're practicing on gets a lot of use, gets a lot of wear. And it may, if you can keep the dust off it, it may actually, I suspect, slightly grippier as you practice on it. The mats that are being used for competition are pretty fresh, and they haven't had a lot of teams run on them. And I've seen issues where robots are pushing stuff and where it seems like it works fine on a practice table. The robot's got more than enough but on the competition table, it just seems like the thing it's pushing is digging in more and the wheels just aren't getting traction. And I don't have a lot of good explanations for that, but I've seen it happen. So if you're going to be pushing a lot of stuff, I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue this year, because there isn't really anything maybe dragging the wheels around. But it's not like last year where those cubes, you might be pushing huge stacks of cubes out there that weighed a bunch.
The teams are also mostly, the teams that I'm looking at here, two of them are going to be using their own tables for tournaments, regardless of whether we're remote or not, because they're gonna do it virtually. But I foresee teams using their own tables this year anyway. It's hard to imagine a scenario where we're going to safely put together in-person tournaments. I would love to just point out, he talked about you have 3 robot runs, you have 3 opportunities to score, and the probability and all that. The 3 opportunities are one of my favorite parts about First Lego League. And so what happens when you have a team of kids and things don't go great? You have that, that opportunity to say, doesn't matter. Absolutely doesn't. If you have 0 points that first match, it is irrelevant because you have 2 more tries. And so, the difference between 0 and almost, almost your top is no different. So you've got 2 more tries to do it. You just kind of let them, help them regroup. I have 2 teams that I coach, and so it's kind of fun at a tournament. It's going to be really interesting now running tournaments and coaching. But I typically let parents run them, and I just spend all my time running back and forth. And all I do is I'm the cheerleader, and I come sliding in and go, it's all right. Let's look at it. What do we need to do? And I just ask them questions and I just pump them up. That's all I do. But really at a tournament, I think your job is a lot of that anyway, is just to help them not get discouraged and just see it's okay. It doesn't matter. We got 2 more tries at this. And if your top score is 100, and if getting all of your points is 100, getting 0 and getting 90, is if their next one's 100, then that 0 or that 90 is the same. It doesn't matter. So
I found one thing I did a couple of years that was sort of a goal for them, involved getting pied as a coach. Last year, my threshold was they had to get 315 points. They had to get more than 100 pie points if they wanted to pie me as a team with cream. It was funny because they were like, yeah, we went well in the robot game, but really what they wanted was to pie me. And they were very excited when they got, I think, 315 or 320 points on one of their matches.
So coach, you new coaches, take a look at your teams and see how things go. There are teams that have gone, well, our first year, not when it was even before I was coaching. We had one program that we thought we would be able to run, and we thought it would be successful. And it actually fell completely apart. It was relying on a color sensor, and we didn't know what we were doing. And so the robot got in there and just drove in circles because the lighting was different. And the kids ended up regrouping and writing a new program on the spot that drove over and hit a truck and scored some points. And apparently it worked because, here we are 13 years later, and, and the Coopers are completely immersed in first. So, that turned into a good experience. But that's because we kind of looked at expectations differently. So, if you're new at this, don't go in with an expectation of 300 points. Don't let your kids do that. Go in and see where they are. And you might find that they do better than you expect, or you might find that they're struggling to get that first program written, and just go with it wherever they are. Go to the tournament with the kind of the idea that you want to be able to make whatever they have done work well that day. And that will be your success story, is to make that work. Or if it doesn't work, make the best of, what you have. And you can make a successful tournament out of the most disastrous day. We went to state last year with one of my teams, and the coach made some dumb mistakes as well, but our brick totally was acting badly, and our programs, it was really bad. The robot behaved very badly. The kids walked away with a gracious professionalism award, but the robot behaved very, very badly. And it still ended up being a great tournament day, and it is what you make out of it. So, so that's pretty much what first Lego is. So at any level, you just make the best of it at wherever your team is in the continuum. And Julie's going to be in an interesting spot because her team rocked it last year, took everything, and now she's starting with a brand new team, brand new kids, and so it's just going to be a totally different world for you, huh? Oh, there you go. She's texted. Enjoy the theme and learn about why each mission's on the table. As you work on the team project, you can get some brainstorming ideas.
Ah, that's a good
Yeah.
one. What else? One of the things that's been nice for the last couple of years now is the fact that provision tokens give you points. So just something to keep in mind is small inspection area, there's 25 points. So I would recommend, you know, the large inspection area isn't that much larger. Try and fit in the small one. And then always keep in mind, you know, every interruption you don't make out on the field is more points you're going to have at precision tokens at the end. So if you're like, this mission, you tried it twice and the sortie just isn't working and you don't think it's going to keep working, you might decide, your technician might be like, you know what, we're just going to sit right now. Or you might decide, no, I want to keep trying it, because what matters more is successfully doing something out of the field than sitting and just holding on to your point. But that's something for them to think about and to gameplay. Yeah. I don't think, I'm trying to think if I've ever seen a team I coached have 100% successful run on the table in competition. And that would be 9 tournaments, and I don't think I've ever seen a run in competition go 100% successfully. They've come pretty close. They had one year, it's actually the one I remember the most momentously. It was, I think, the second year, and we had a kid on the team who was he was the most focused kid I've ever seen in terms of like, he would sit at the table for 4 hours programming and struggling and trying stuff and not give up. In competition, they went out and there was a bin that would position, and then they would drive around and push a bunch of pieces into the bin and then bring in back, and then they would need to take the pieces out of the bin and load them into an attachment that would go put them out on the field. This was Animal Allies. And they were driving, as the robot was pushing the bin back to home, with all the food pellets that come out of the dispenser, it slipped off the side of the robot, but it didn't touch home. So it was on the field. So the rep didn't take it and it stayed there. So, and usually that was to come back early so that while the robot was doing other sorties, they could be loading those into this complicated attachment so that they could then put it on the robot. And on a subsequent sortie, the robot came and just happened to drive in and push it all the way legally into home. But now, Andrew John, instead of having like a minute to load these things carefully into the attachment without them getting slipped sideways or whatever, he had like 10 seconds. And I'm filming this with my iPhone, and I'm practically like, oh my God. And Andrew John, not getting nervous, he's not panicking, I can't even load that in 30 seconds, and in like 10 seconds he's loading everything and getting everything in and then snapping it onto the robot and pulling the little pin that keeps them from falling through, and they get launched. And I mean, it was like watching a kid do heart surgery. And they launch it and it goes out and it's dispensing pellets, and I'm watching the video, and I know that the way they have set up all these missions, they're going to up 80 points on the field in like the last 10 seconds. And I watch my video go to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and there's still like 8 of these things to deliver, or 6 of them or whatever. And then I realized that I'd started video before the match started, because I can hear the countdown. And I realized that like with like 2 seconds to spare, they drop all of those things out on the field and get to the final spot. And they just had a absolute winning run that was looked disastrous from the beginning. And by staying cool under pressure, they managed to pull it together. And that was the point that I actually went into shock. Like I couldn't hear anything. My arms went numb. Because yeah.
Yeah, if you coach long enough, you have a story. You have one of those. So my story is from actually longer ago than that. It was the last year my oldest one was in FLL. And I had two teams, and one team happened to be younger, just happened that way. They got up to the practice. So the way the tournaments go is in the morning, we typically run a practice run as well. And so you a chance to get used to the table and the lighting and the where you're supposed to stand and all of that. And so you run the practice run at the table, and the judging sessions kind of all happen in the morning, and then the regular matches are in the afternoon. So this team got up to do their practice round, and they got up to the table, and first thing they did was drop an attachment that breaks into 576,000 tiny little pieces. Shloosh! So they did that, and they were rattled, of course. They got up to the table and they ran the wrong program, and they set another one up in the wrong spot, and everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong at this practice run. And they were a wreck. They were distraught. And so, of course, I'm that silver lining person. So I come whipping in at the end, because that's what I do. I met them at the end and said, that was a great practice round. And they're preteen girls, right? So they have the eye roll down to a science. They're great at it. And they gave me the "you are an idiot" look. And I'm like, no, stop, listen to me. Everything that could possibly go wrong in a round just went wrong in your practice match. And you know how to fix every one of them. They were not convinced right away, but they eventually came around, and they walked away with the only championship trophy that the Girl Scouts in Juneau have ever won. So the deal is that I had lost that team at 10 o'clock in the morning. They were gone. I had lost them for the judging. I had lost them for everything. They were so demoralized after that practice round. But because I wouldn't let them do that, they pulled it back together. They were able to see, things a little differently. And I watched them. I didn't do it. I didn't fix any of those things. All I did was remind them that they could fix those things. So they pulled all those things back together, and that was the first invitation that we've ever had to state. That was the only time we've ever got a championship trophy. It probably will be, because we don't practice like a lot of these teams do. We practice once a week. That's it. But they just did something amazing, and they really shocked themselves. But it's just an opportunity to see what kids can do when you remind them that they can do it. So there we go. There's my story. The other Girl Scout team took second place championship trophy, because at that point we were doing first and second championship, and that will obviously never happen either. But yeah, that's it.
Okay. Should we call it a wrap?
All right.
Any questions?
Anybody have anything else? Any other questions at all?
No, I want to just thank you guys. It was really helpful. Everything you told me, I took pictures, wrote it down, and really think it's going to be helpful.
Good.
Okay.
Have fun. That's the other thing, is have fun.
That's the main thing. That's really the big thing is you guys have fun and help the kids to realize that that's what their primary goal is, just to have fun.
Yeah, especially this year. Every year, but especially this year. Yeah.
All righty. I will get off then.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. And I'll have slides and stuff up as soon as I can do it.
Okay, you might put both the PowerPoint up and if you do a version with stuff stripped, because if people have PowerPoint, downloading it, and running through it lets them view
Yeah, I
notes,
gotta
etc.
figure out how to put I'm learning all kinds of website tricks,
Okay.
one at a
Good luck.
time.
Okay.
All right. Hey, thank you. Thanks, everybody.